Cannibal. This word immediately conjures images of savages from remote jungles or maniacs from crime chronicles. But today, you will hear a story that will completely shatter your perceptions. She was only 12. She went to school, loved her dolls, and was afraid of the dark. Nothing foreshadowed that very soon, darkness would take up residence inside her. How can hunger, fear, and desperation drive a child to commit the unthinkable? How can a 12-year-old girl become someone who is feared and misunderstood? Brace yourselves, this is the story of a girl who became a cannibal at 12. What pushed a schoolgirl to such brutality, and was she ever punished? In 2018, the story of this girl shocked, without exaggeration, everyone who heard it. Back then, the media reported on a shocking incident. A couple from St. Petersburg committed a gruesome crime. 22-year-old Arkady Zverev and 12-year-old Valeria Yargina took the life of, and 21-year-old Alexander Popovich. Far too many questions arise. How can a 22-year-old guy and a 12-year-old child be a couple? Where are her parents? And how in the world did they manage to eat a person? Of course, I'll answer these questions. But let's take things in order. Arkady Zverev was born in 1996 in Rutsovsk, a small city in Altai Krai, with a population of about 121,000 people. He was a late child for his mother, who was already 40 when she had him. Very soon after his birth, the woman split from her partner due to his infidelity and raised her son alone, without a father who, I'll tell you ahead of time, never participated in the boy's life. From an early age, Arkady was a withdrawn boy. At school, they called him Gashin, something like garbage, because of his slovenly appearance, which was likely the reason he had no friends. It wasn't until he was 19 that Arkady found a close friend named Sasha. Alexander had no place to live, so Arkady invited him to his home. This is likely why they started hanging out. One evening, while drunk, Arkady's friend told him about how he had murdered his own mother, and soon after, suggested Arkady do the same himself. This revelation sent Arkady into such a rage that he lunged at his friend with a knife. Sasha came running back then, all covered in blood, his eyes bulging. It turned out that Arkady, while he was asleep, had cut him up like a pig. Fortunately, Sasha survived, even though he lost a lot of blood, shared the building manager. In court, the victim claimed Arkady had been taking medication prescribed for his sick mother. An investigation was conducted. The guy was found insane and sent for mandatory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. Zverev got through this period of his life calmly. Some time after his release from the hospital, Arkady met his first love, Olya Semibokova, who reciprocated his feelings. She naively hoped to change the guy for the better. Olya's grandmother, who lived with her, was against it, but the couple moved in with the girl anyway. However, their relationship was far from ideal. Conflicts often arose, and even senior citizens got hurt in them. During one argument, Arkady even raised his hand against Olya's grandfather. In 2017, Olya and Arkady decided to leave their hometown. The girl took 100,000 rubles and a suitcase of clothes with her. The couple decided to start their journey in Novosibirsk, where Olya enrolled in the psychology department, but she couldn't last long and was expelled. After that, the couple headed to St. Petersburg. The lovers settled in Marino, in the Devyatkino district. Olga found work as a donut seller and a part-time cleaner. Arkady, however, was in no hurry to get a job, dreaming of a music career or mastering the tattoo artist trade. Money was extremely tight. According to acquaintances, for a long time, the young couple lived on nothing but instant noodles. Then, Semibokova decided to reconcile with her relatives so they could give her at least some money. They did, transferring the girl 40,000 rubles to buy a tattoo machine for Arkady, hoping he would start working then. However, for days after the money was transferred, tragedy struck. Olga fell from the balcony of the 9th floor, despite them living on the 4th. Zverev claimed he was fast asleep at the time. On social media, he posted a long message expressing shock and pain. "We lived together for 3 years. Her name was Olya, and she was a wonderful person, but lately, she had started having problems with depression. It all happened unexpectedly for me. We hadn't argued, the day was beautiful, and she even looked better than usual. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. I woke up. I was in shock. An ocean of emotions raged inside me. Why? Why is this happening to me?" The guy wrote. Zverev was not charged in connection with his girlfriend's death, and it was all written off as the girl having fallen on her own. Arkady immediately moved out of the apartment in Marino and soon went to work in Moscow. But before that, through an acquaintance, he acquired a Venom costume, the anti-hero from the Spider-Man franchise. That was it. Zverev tried his hand at being an animator, standing on New Arbat Street in Moscow and making money by taking photos with anyone willing. In September, he went on vacation to Sochi. Down south, Arkady met an old friend, Dmitry, who later told investigators the following. He talked to me a lot about some kind of fear. I didn't understand then, thinking it was fears like mine, everyday stuff. But he was talking about something more serious, maybe the fear of killing, Dmitry recalled. In September 2018, in Sochi, Arkady met 12-year-old Lara, the daughter of a local woman who earned a living selling her body. After a brief interaction between the little girl and the 22-year-old guy, Lara, from a dysfunctional family, became interested in Arkady. She began to use him to take revenge on those who had wronged her. So, Arkady beat up several teenagers who, according to Lara, had been mocking her. She simply had no sense of reality. No one explained to her where the line was between the movies she watched non-stop and real life. She just wasn't raised, acquaintances of the girl said. Lara was known for her unusual behavior and cruelty. Once, she even took the life of a cat. Furthermore, at the age of 12, she set fire to a place where homeless people usually slept, and nobody could do anything to her. Lara didn't even try to attend school. After a week of communication between the 12-year-old girl and the 22-year-old guy, Lara decided to go to St. Petersburg with Arkady. On September 23, 2018, they decided to hitchhike, since buying a ticket from Sochi to St. Petersburg without documents was impossible. The girl's mother, apparently, didn't really look for her, so the couple calmly reached their destination. As it turned out later, the girl had run away before, so her mother didn't really try to find her. The alarm was only raised by the school. Valeria looked 16 to 17 years old, height about 5'4", medium build, oval face, green-brown eyes, medium nose and lips, shoulder-length black hair. Was wearing dark blue denim shorts and a camouflage t-shirt, stated the text of the wanted notice distributed by the Internal Affairs Directorate for the Kostinsky district. Despite this, there was no news of the child. Nobody had seen the living girl, and after a few days, the investigative committee opened a murder case. Meanwhile, the pair initially had to wander around St. Petersburg. They barely got by, sleeping in cheap tents or doorways, until one day they met 21-year-old Alexander Popovich at a Burger King. For a symbolic payment, the guy let the kids stay at his old house, located in the village of Ga, about 30 miles from St. Petersburg. On October 2nd, Popovich decided to visit the tenants and headed to the village. Arkady and Lara welcomed him warmly, invited him to the table, and bought beer. As it was getting late, Alexander didn't go home and stayed the night. However, the unfortunate man didn't live to see the morning. Zverev stabbed him after the girl claimed that he had made a pass at her. Then the most shocking part of this story began. I will describe some events to you. First, the accomplices sawed off the murdered man's hands, and then his head, deciding to cook it in the microwave. And it was actually Lara who did this. As Zverev admitted in court, he had long been curious what human brains tasted like. The cannibals also ate the eyes, removing and boiling them. Lara, in turn, recounted that the brains turned out to be too sweet for her taste. After such a dinner, Arkady went to sleep, while Valeria spent the whole night looking at the butchered body. On one hand, one could assume they did this due to a lack of money for food. But no, as detectives later established, they had money on them. They ate their acquaintance because of sick fantasies. Shortly before this, law enforcement had already picked up the trail of Arkady, who had taken the child. The next morning, the murder victim's mother received a call from a neighbor, who reported that smoke was coming from the house, and a man and a girl had climbed out the window, according to her. The mother got worried and asked her middle son to stop by Alexander's place and check. That's when he found his brother's body. Or rather, what was left of it. I didn't know it was him, and I jumped back out. I was in a panic. Only one thought. Please don't let it be him. I called a neighbor. He broke the door down. The neighbor woman, and I went in and lifted the blanket. I realized it was my brother. Police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy found a frying pan on the stove with pieces of Alexander's flesh and pulled his head out of the microwave. His hands were also lying separately from the body. That same day, the pair was detained at a railway station. At first, the criminals said they simply wanted to eat. Then they confessed to killing Popovich due to an argument, as he had supposedly harassed Lara. During interrogation, it was established that there had been no harassment. The girl had simply wound Zverev up and made him do it for her. She had acted the same way in Sochi. A medical examination established that she had never engaged in sexual intercourse. Why Arkady took the child from Sochi remained unknown. Lara deliberately deceived Zverev, provoking him to beat people up because she enjoyed it. Investigative committee employees working the case were confident that the idea to have a dinner of human flesh belonged specifically to the 12-year-old girl. During interrogations, unlike the despondent Zverev, she behaved coolly, recounted everything in detail, and was clearly amused. Arkady, on his part, requested a closed court hearing, explaining, "I don't want fame. I committed a grave crime." Meanwhile, Alexander's relatives had to bury him piecemeal. When law enforcement returned Alexander's head after the forensic medical examinations were complete, a second funeral was held. Coming to his senses, Arkady repented for what he'd done during one of the interrogations, and in a pre-trial detention cell, even attempted to leave this world. He was pulled out at the last moment, but Arkady never came around. The guy died after lying in a coma for 2 months, connected to a life support machine. The cannibal was buried near St. Petersburg. The fate of his underage companion is far more interesting. Although she was essentially an accomplice, at the time of the murder, she was 12 years old, so she could not be convicted. The underage accomplice was returned to the Krasnodar territory. The girl went to a regular school at a boarding institution, as by that time, her mother had already been stripped of her parental rights. Lara hardly communicated with anyone. Classmates recounted that once, while discussing the school menu, Valeria declared, "What's your pizza? I've eaten human brains. My boyfriend and I had a romantic dinner." After that, the students' parents rebelled, and Lara was transferred to a closed-type special school. The girl moved everywhere with a pink suitcase that had been left behind from Alia Semibokova. Interestingly, they also couldn't put the schoolgirl in a psychiatric hospital. Psychiatric diagnoses were not confirmed. And the story of the girl cannibal doesn't end there. At the end of 2022, information surfaced that Valeria had become a prize winner in a municipal competition for poetic mastery called Open Mic on the theme Yes, We Live, Not Forgetting, taking 3rd place for reading the poem Open Letter. Upon graduating from the institution, the girl decided to obtain 2 specialties at once: shoemaker and cook, and was even looking for a college where she could learn the basics of culinary arts. As soon as Valeria turned 18, she changed her last name, first name, and patronymic, trying to erase the past, trying to distance herself from those horrific events, now claiming she did not eat Popovich. After school, Lara got married and gave birth to a daughter, but family life didn't work out due to her spouse's infidelities. The woman couldn't forgive her beloved and got a divorce but didn't forbid him from spending time with their daughter. Valeria does not like to recall her gruesome past. According to the woman, she worked with specialists for a long time to recover from the events of 2018. "I am a completely different person now, and I don't want to be judged for what happened 7 years ago. I've done a lot of work with psychologists and psychotherapists," Lara told journalists. She now denies her involvement in the massacre of Alexander and the consumption of his body. According to her, she was hiding in another room at the moment of the murder and dismemberment. "I was very frightened, huddled in a corner from fear, and couldn't move. I absolutely did not eat human flesh," the woman claims. However, during earlier interrogations, she said something completely different. The only witness to those events, Arkady, also confirmed that she ate the victim's flesh. What is fair in such a situation? Should a 12-year-old girl who committed the unthinkable be held responsible, or should she have been treated due to her age? Is the system failing by protecting minors, sometimes turning a blind eye even to such violent crimes? Look at these faces. Do you see cannibals among these pensioners, women, and children? I think that half a year before the tragedy, none of them suspected they would start eating their own kind either. How often do you hear stories about cannibalism? In modern society, such cases are rare, but they do exist. However, today we are going to talk not about one specific maniac cannibal, but about an entire village of cannibals with a population of 6,000 people, located in the Tomsk region. The Natsino tragedy is one of the most horrific events in Soviet history. 6,000 people were deported to Siberia and dropped off on an island where there was no housing, no food, and no tools. Very soon, famine and disease broke out among the settlers, followed by murder and cannibalism on a horrific scale. Why were even minors and women brought to the island? And how did it happen that living children became victims of cannibals, while others burned alive by a campfire in their sleep? The tragedy on Notsino Island in the Tomsk region occurred over 90 years ago. However, for almost 70 years, until the 2000s, this story was strictly classified because horror of such a scale had never happened before. The authorities literally created around 1,000 cannibals, forcing them to eat women and children. Before starting this video, I want to remind you about the like button, which you are clicking not for the horrible story, but for my work on this video. And also, please write any comment, any word or sentence. It really helps the video's promotion. By the early 1930s, two waves of peasant deportations to command posts in Siberia and Kazakhstan had already swept across the USSR. But the problem, in the government's view, was not solved. Millions of peasants continued to flee to cities, seeking work. The country was gripped by mass epidemics combined with a famine that, by modern estimates, claimed at least 7 million human lives in 1932-33. They tried to save the situation with a passport reform for the urban population, which would separate the visiting peasants and make their stay in the cities illegal. Mass arrests began almost immediately. Patrols detained thousands of people without documents on the streets and sent them in freight trains to Siberia. This was how the plan for its settlement was fulfilled. Over 5 years, the number of Siberian residents was supposed to increase by several million people. Various people fell victim to this tactic. A resident of the Siberian village of Notsino, whose hut had been turned into an inn at the time, recalled asking one of the guys how he got there. "I was a student in Moscow on the weekend. I went to visit my aunt, a Muscovite. I got to her door, knocked, but before my aunt could open it, I was grabbed. I was arrested for not having my passport on me," he replied. There were many such stories. Driver Vladimir from Moscow dashed out for cigarettes without his documents. Maria from Murom came to the capital to buy a suit for her husband and got caught in a raid. Locksmith's apprentice Gregory was detained while traveling with a voucher for treatment in Moscow. Even two sons of the Tomsk prosecutor ended up on Notsino Island. They, however, got lucky. Their father found the boys and took them home. But it wasn't just random passersby who were gathered in the taiga. Along with violators of the passport regime, criminals and convicts were brought along. And when the battle for survival began, this played its tragic role. No one was expecting the settlers' arrival. When the commandant's office in the village of Alexandrovsko received a telegram announcing their appearance, an official replied that they couldn't accept so many people, and there was no housing or provisions for them. The reply from Novosibirsk was short. 3,000 have departed for your disposition. Expect another 3 in a week. After a meeting in Alexandrovsko, it was decided. The people would be sent to a small island located in the middle of the Ob River. It made an excellent prison. On both sides, the distance to the shore was at least a kilometer, making escape practically impossible. Not all passengers made it to the island. The first deaths began while still on the barges. There was a lack of space and food. Repeat offenders beat up ordinary citizens and took their food. On the day of landing, about 40 dead bodies were dragged onto the shore and piled up. They didn't bury them immediately. While the gravediggers rested, some of the dead began to come back to life. A gruesome scene. Among the bodies, there were survivors. They began to moan and scream. 8 people came to. They begged for help and crawled towards people across the sand. From the very first days, the disorganized mass of arrivals, weakened by the long journey of about 3 weeks and a virtual lack of food, began to die of starvation. There was also the necessity of providing for themselves the conditions at their place of detention, aside from an unequipped tent camp and the absence of any infrastructure. Strong winds, high humidity, and damp ground in any weather, an abundance of blood-sucking insects, taiga mosquitoes, ticks, and gnats, the scarcity of edible root crops and berry flora. The first 2 weeks on the island were total chaos. The special settlers, individually or in groups, began a struggle for survival. After 2 weeks, the islanders slowly began to be relocated to special settlements being created on the shore. Over 2 weeks on the river island, from around May 20th to June 6th, out of the 6,000 deported islanders, more than 1,000 perished. By June, locals had nicknamed Notsino the Island of Death. And although some islanders were resettled, the situation didn't improve. People arrived on the island in the clothes they were wearing when detained during the spring raids, some barefoot. After the first fair day, a cold snap began, but there was no shelter. Only 3 tents for typhus patients and 1 more for food distribution. Hungry, exhausted people, without shelter, having no tools, and for the most part no labor skills, let alone the skills for organized struggle against hardships, found themselves in a hopeless situation. Frostbitten, they were only capable of building fires, sitting, lying, sleeping by the fire, wandering the island, and eating rotten wood, bark, and moss. It's hard to say if there was any possibility of doing anything else, because for 3 days, no provisions were issued to anyone. Fires and smoke spread across the island. They burned alive by campfires in their sleep, died of exhaustion and cold, from burns and the dampness that surrounded the people. On the first day after the sunny day, a team of gravediggers managed to bury only 295 bodies, leaving the rest unburied for the next day. But the worst part, no provisions were brought. Food wasn't delivered until the 5th day. Before that, people ate whatever they could find. After receiving rye flour from the first food shipment, the settlers ran to the river and mixed a thin gruel. They hadn't been given any dishes, so they did this in hats, sleeves, jackets, and pants legs. There were also those who lunged at the dry flour. They would choke and die of asphyxiation. On the first day, a crush formed near the distribution point, and the guards opened fire on the prisoners. Later, the system was changed. Everyone was divided into brigades, and the common ration was given to a so-called brigadier. These positions were typically taken over by criminals who ate everything themselves. The island was guarded by 50 riflemen who relieved each other. At any one time, there were no more than 10 riflemen in the special settlement. The workers practically didn't intervene in what was happening. They mainly guarded a few tents with provisions, medicines, and where the sick lay. Criminals banded together into gangs that hunted the others on the island. They took clothes, yanked out gold teeth. For 1 crown, the guards would give a matchbox or some newspaper sheets for rolling cigarettes. To teeth or a relatively new coat could be traded for a pack of cheap tobacco or half a loaf of bread. Cannibalism soon began, sporadically at first, and then on a threatening scale. A transcript of a conversation with one of the Nazino cannibals caught in the act has been preserved. Is it true you ate human flesh? No, not true. I only ate the liver and heart. Tell us, how did you do it? Very simple. Like they make shashlik. Made little skewers from twigs, cut it into pieces, strung them on the skewers, and fried them over the fire. And who did you get the meat from? Living or dead people? Why from the dead? That's carrion. I chose those who were no longer living, but not yet dead. You could see they were fading. In a day or two, they'd kick the bucket anyway, so it's easier for them to die that way. A local resident from the nearby village of Nazino tells of a meeting with a female settler whose calves had been cut off, fried, and eaten by the cannibals on the island. A 40-year-old woman who looked like an ancient crone had wrapped her legs in rags. They were constantly freezing. Another memory. It was said that on the eve of the proceedings with the chief's wife, the prisoners, having descended into cannibalism, cut off her breasts, and she lost her mind. Women on the island often became victims of the cannibals. The daughter of one exile recounts her father's words. In the camp, they dug dugouts, and it was dangerous for girls and children to leave them. Women had their breasts cut off, teenagers and toddlers were stolen to be eaten. Cold, hunger, disease, murder. Mortality on the island only grew. They couldn't even keep up with burying the bodies. An epidemic of dysentery began. After that, the strong and healthy began to be evacuated. They were loaded onto a barge, taken 60 miles away, and dropped off on the shore to develop the taiga. In equally wild conditions, the first settlers arrived on the island in May. The evacuation was completed by August. By the most optimistic estimates, over these 4 months, round 2,200 prisoners out of 6,000 managed to survive. The Nazino tragedy would have remained unknown if Vasily Velichko, an instructor of the Narim District Party Committee, had not intervened. In July 1933, he interviewed dozens of those involved in organizing the camp and also recorded testimonies from village residents. Velichko sent his report to 3 addresses, including Moscow, to Stalin. The investigation that commenced confirmed most of the facts in the letter, after which all materials were classified. Residents of Nazino try to preserve the memory of the tragedy. In the village, a church has been built with donations dedicated to the innocent victims of the Gulag. Every year in June, flowers are brought to the cross on the island. It is not always possible. The island often gets flooded, and it might soon disappear completely. But in the country's history, the Death Island, or the Island of Cannibals, will remain forever as one of its most horrifying pages. During their study of the case, investigators also found such gruesome files. One evening, Galina Grigorievna Gorbunova was passing through Moscow. The police decided she was a street urchin and detained her. It didn't even bother anyone that the woman was pregnant. The baby was born already on the island. There is no further information about the child. It is presumed he was eaten. The fact of cannibalism wasn't just a rumor, local doctors officially confirmed it. Thus, 12 bodies were discovered with soft parts cut out, and in some, internal organs, lungs, liver were missing. However, for sending to the island, even people with passports were arrested on the streets, as every week a certain number of people had to be dispatched to settle specific areas of Siberia. Due to a shortfall, even local residents who hadn't violated anything fell under the sweep. One such person was Gregory Ivanovich Buligin, who went out to buy bread and had his passport on him. But there were even more absurd stories. Ekaterina Zolotareva, 81 years old. The pensioner couldn't even move without help. She was deported from Kislovodsk as a prostitute. Ekaterina Kotelnikova, 85 years old. The old woman was already nearly dead, unable to speak, let alone move. She passed away before reaching the island. Mikhail Erafimovich, 32 years old, was deported from Sochi with his wife and 9-year-old daughter. He was a legless invalid. The police officers who detained ordinary people on the streets understood they were sending innocent people to their deaths. They had an order, and they executed it. Otherwise, they themselves would have been sent to that island. Residents of neighboring villages later recounted hearing screams and crying day and night coming from the island. It is considered that the Natsino tragedy ended in August 1933. After the investigation, the commission decided that the Tomsk authorities were primarily to blame for the tragedy. Most of them were fired or removed from their positions. Some were brought to trial, although the main executor of the deportation in the region escaped punishment, getting off with a reprimand on the party line. And then, right up until 1938, he continued to work as the head of the Department of Labor Settlements. Almost 30 commandant's office workers were brought to criminal responsibility for beatings, up to murder, theft of food, clothing, shoes, and looting. During the first expedition in the summer of 1989, members of the Tomsk Memorial Society carried out a so-called certification of Natsino Island. Data about this place was entered into the registry of the Ministry of Culture, and since then, the island has been an object of Russia's historical heritage, currently existing as a monument. I will leave all important archival documents for review in my Telegram channel. The link will be in the description. Many people still have a question. Why didn't people flee from the island? The first reason is the river current, the cold, and those who managed it were met on the shore. The second is that they were guarded, and anyone trying to escape was shot on the spot. For all the locals and overseers, the people on the island weren't just people without passports. Everyone was told that they were hardened murderers and maniacs. Therefore, real hunts were sometimes organized for escapees, even though they just wanted to survive. So, why were innocent people taken and exported? According to historians, to cleanse the major cities to which people were flocking for work, and to rapidly settle Siberia using such inhumane methods.